it just goes to show you can know someone for 18 months, they still don't know how to pronounce your name. It's Scruton. Anyway, so my job here today is to be like the living embodiment of all the stuff that you're hearing, and it's uncanny really how much I am the living embodiment of how much of what you're hearing. So the title here is How Real Food Changed My Life, A Patient's Perspective, and I have the subtitle which I have on all the talks I give. I've never given a talk this big before, but I do presentations at work and in various other places. Type 2, and I just count up the months as they go past. So since my first diagnosis, which was gestational diabetes, that's 23 years and 1 month. So I've got a little bit of experience of this, but there are people with more, obviously. So the background is that my dad, my brother, 2 of my uncles, 1 on each side of the family, and my grandmother were all diagnosed with diabetes. So I knew from an early age that I was at high risk, so what did I do? Well, I'm a really well brought up person. I'm exceptionally polite, and perhaps overly trusting at times. So I followed the healthy eating guidelines as closely as I could. That's what I did. I went away and I read up, and I think I probably followed a similar curve to Zoe's. So I read Diet for a Small Planet when I left home at 17 and became primarily a whole food vegetarian. But as soon as I did that, obviously what I was doing was basing all my meals on starchy carbohydrates. I ate one heck of a lot of brown rice, one heck of a lot of brown pasta, one heck of a lot of brown bread, one heck of a lot of beans, and a few other things as well, you know, potatoes and so on. So for me, as soon as I started down that road, staying at a stable weight was always a struggle. I'm not against any of these things, but for me, they were not such a hot thing to eat. So here's the food pyramid. Now, when that came in, I followed that to the T as much as I possibly could. So you'll see there you go, 6 to 11 servings of your bread, rice, and I had such trouble trying to fit all that in. And I also had to really get to be a good cook because obviously it's kind of bland. So you need to really get, you know, your spices, all that sort of thing going. But that's how I ate. That then morphed into this, which I have real trouble with because I was asked to do a study by a lady who was doing a study on how people use the label on packaging foods and so on and so forth. And it looks almost really to me as though this is a guide in how to eat packaged food with a little bit on the side. And when I did that study, I found it was incredibly hard for me to avoid the reds, which presumably is what I'm supposed to do, unless I ate really, really processed and packaged food. Bizarre, really, isn't it? And the things I was accustomed to eating, I couldn't even eat them at all if I was actually trying to stick to the labels. But anyway, so there you go. So in my early 30s, I decided it was time to have a baby. I saw a cute one. I fell for it. I thought, yeah, I'm gonna get pregnant. So I did, really. And I had a really amazingly easy pregnancy to start with. No morning sickness, none of that stuff. You know, it was all cool. And then I went for my glucose tolerance test. And that really did not go well. So what the nurse said to me was, don't worry, love, you know, all you have to do is cut down on your biscuits. But I never was a biscuit eater, you know, those hard, pasty, chewy things. You know, that's how I feel about them anyway. Maybe not everyone does. So I knew at that point that I was in big trouble. So the next day, they taught me how to inject myself with insulin. And my pregnancy became a heck of a lot more scary than it had been to start with. But obviously, I felt this huge sense of responsibility towards my daughter, as she turned out to be. And so I tried very hard to do exactly what I was told, even down to trying to eat the diabetic meal I was given in hospital, which was grossly disgusting. You know, a white bread sandwich, a processed yogurt, and a banana. Hopefully things have changed since those days. So when I was in hospital waiting to give birth, because obviously I had high blood pressure, so on and so forth, and I was induced, I actually got my husband to bring food in because I really just couldn't face it all. So there you go. So, oh no, don't see that yet. So after I had my daughter, while I was breastfeeding, it was all cool, things seemed to be okay, but as soon as I stopped doing that, when she got a bit fed up with it and started, you know, battering me and asking for solids and so on, my system just went down again, and I was re-diagnosed with type 2. So I buckled down, I followed all the stuff. I did not want to be a sick parent to my daughter. I did not want her to have all her teenage years worrying about me, and so on and so forth. So I did what we all do, and I put weight on. That's what I did. And I got a bit podgy. That's her in the corner when she was blonde. So that's 4 years later when she started school. That's 10 years later. And by this time, I'm really not feeling well at all. And everybody kept saying to me, oh, how pale you are, how pale. You know, you just don't look well. Thanks, I don't feel well either. And then the other thing they would say to me was, I don't understand it, Laura. You're the healthiest eating person I know. How can you possibly be sick? Well, I kind of felt it was a bit unfair too, to tell you the truth. Anyway, 14 years later, and by that point, I was so ashamed of myself because I was convinced that I either must be stupid, so I didn't understand the healthy guidelines, or there was just something strange and weird about me. And that was why, you know, this thing wasn't working. So I had huge bucket loads of shame and worry and guilt, and I would not let people photograph me, which is why that's off my driving license. I did look better when I smiled, but there you go. So that's how I was. So from 2008 onwards, this is all smushed up because I couldn't get you a proper timeline without it getting too confusing. So in the course of all this period, I tried 3 diabetes drugs, rosiglitazone, which was marketed as Avandia, which appeared to work by making me get fatter quicker, metformin, which for many people gives you 24/7 gut ache. So I said to the doctor, which it did for me, even on the slow release version, which she was very miffed about, that either I stop eating or I stop metformin, because that's the only way I'm going to survive going forwards. So by this point, my reputation was starting to get a bit dodgy. So then I took gliclazide, and what happened with that is, once I took the dose of a morning, I was lucky to be able to drive into work and still be able to actually cope and be safe driving. So I did what very many people do. I ate extra carb for my breakfast to make sure that I could cope with my medication, which seemed quite barkingly mad, but it seemed to be my only option. I also developed rheumatoid arthritis, which was anti-CCP antibody positive for the medics among you, and I developed carpal tunnel syndrome. So what that meant was my knees hurt, my ankles hurt, my wrists hurt, my fingers didn't work properly. There's a bit I've missed out. Oh yeah, my elbows weren't good if I carried anything heavy. So for me, I'd wake up in the morning and I would say, right, is this a good day, is this a bad day? Have I been lightly beaten up or have I been run over by a tractor? And then I'd put my feet on the floor and they would hurt. And then I'd unstiffen for the first half hour or so. I'd have to get my husband to help me put my jewellery on. I'd go to work, I'd have trouble typing. I couldn't even get the wee plastic bits off the milk bottle tub, so he used to take them off for me and put them in the fridge. So to be honest, I was not a happy bunny at all. When I say I had constant fatigue, I was always tired, I never felt well, and sometimes I had what I can only describe as extreme exhaustion. So if I did 20 minutes of dusting, I would have a lie down. When it was my daughter's 18th, we went to the races for the day. I only made it to the first race, and I spent the rest of the day lying down in the car. Thank goodness it was a big car. So there you go. Also with my weight, obviously, I'd gone from a size 10 to a size 14, and I was trying so hard not to go into a size 16. Twice I went to swimming clubs and lost 10% of my body weight, and everybody clapped me, and it was all good, except as soon as I left the swimming club, I was back on the same treadmill all over again. So I got up to, I think I was obese in medical terms. I think I was about 31 by the time I finished. So I found the Real Food Low Carb Diet. Thank you at this point to every professional who's ever put any information out there, because without that I would never have been able to do what I did as quickly as I did, and I would have become a lot iller first. My friend pointed me to it on the internet, and at that point I knew nobody that had done it, and the only thing I'd heard in the media was that celebrities did it and it was really silly, you know, so that was that. But I went on to it, I went to my doctor, and as it said you should do, and I said I want to do this, and she said you're mad, you won't be able to do it, you'll harm yourself, and I'll see you to give you the medication when you've finished failing. So I'd have loved to have done it with my doctor, but she didn't know. That was what she'd been told, you know? I would have loved to have worked with my doctor. Anyway, so I did it. I didn't go 100% because my husband was very worried about me, and so were various other people. But I lost 2 stone without effort or hunger very quickly. And when I'd lost that weight before, I was obsessed with food, and I was ready to gnaw my leg off by 10 o'clock in the morning, except that, you know, I wanted to keep my legs. So the only effort involved obviously was doing my pack up and then just fielding the people that were trying to force biscuits into me every 5 minutes. So I got back into my size 10 and I was weight stable. I was not putting weight on all the time. For the first time in my entire adult life, I wasn't having to struggle to stay stable. I didn't get hungry 2 hours after eating, don't have an afternoon slump, and obviously I stopped the diabetes medication very quickly, more quickly than I think my doctor would have liked. And then to add to my pleasure, after a year eating a diet that was low carb, higher healthy fat, anti-inflammatory, I stopped the medication for the rheumatoid arthritis as well, because I was no longer in pain. I was still fatigued, I still had absolutely no strength or stamina, but I did not have to judge every morning what I was going to do by how much pain I was experiencing. I know some people get steroids for the pain, and obviously, but the consultant wouldn't give them to me because of my blood sugars, which was probably a very wise move. So I went and spoke to, by that point I wasn't seeing the consultant, I was seeing the nurse, and I said to the nurse, well, you know, I seem to be fine, I don't think I need to take the medication anymore. And she said, okay, so we'll stop it now, but bear in mind this is only going to be for a brief period and then you're going to have another flare-up. And so I said to her, so if I could avoid having another flare-up, would I be able to get my strength or my stamina back? And she was a very kind woman. She did not want to give me false hope, so she didn't. She said, no. She said, no, it's not going to happen. I've never seen it. You just have to, you know, sort your life out so that you can live in that way. So I had to think about that. And to be honest with you, if it hadn't been for the fact that I'd done what I'd had done with my blood sugar, I'd have given up at that point. I really would have done. I'd have totally just given up. But I didn't. And I just put this in here because obviously this is the kind of diet that I've been eating. And the thing that I really like about this was it was the first time I'd ever seen a guideline that said, after meeting minimum intake of fat and protein, individualised diet for personal good health. I'd always been told to do one thing and fail at it. That was how it felt to me. But here was something saying to me, you can tweak this, you can do what suits you. And now, obviously, I feel as though I was a bit thick for a number of years, that I didn't know that before. And, you know, I went through a phase, obviously, where I was very angry because there was a diet that was told to me to avoid me having a theoretical risk of heart disease, probably. And there I was as a result of doing this, because you'll know from Zoe's talk that I was eating a lot of carbs because obviously I was doing the lower fat thing. There wasn't an awful lot left for me to eat, you know, in that way. As a result of following the advice I was given and trying my best, there I was with a disease which raised my risk of heart disease, and another one that raised my risk of heart disease as well. So my doctor was really miffed with me when I refused to take the statins, I have to tell you this. So here's some data. It's the best I can do because obviously I don't own my data and I'm kind of out of the system at the moment. So the points that you see there, up there, are the points where I actually have data. So by 2008, and for some time before that, while I was taking the medication, you know, I was at 58, sort of around that for my HbA1c, because that's just where I was. Then I went down to the first bit there is when I got to 48, and I think probably that went down a bit quicker than that, but it was all confused because I was trying to struggle with the rheumatoid at the same time. I just had enough on my plate. And so really the only data I've got is the stuff that I managed to get and keep and write down and not lose. The next point there is when I went down to 47 on sort of the last test that I've had at the doctor's. And like I say, I'm kind of out of the system at the moment. So this is the latest data I can give you. So May 13, because I know that doctors like to know your blood pressure, 133/77. My current weight is 60 kilos. And if you remember that I said that I was weight stable, that's not totally true because in the last few months I've actually lost a few more pounds. I wasn't trying to, but as you'll see here, I've gone down now, so I'm like 34, 35, 36, 37, testing myself on the Freestyle Libre. And that's when I got the confidence from reading Jason Fung's stuff to not have to eat as often as I had in the past, because obviously I've been told all my life I had to eat regularly, and because my family had been out with me at times when I was so glucose dependent, I was all over the place, they were always wanting me to eat to make sure that I wasn't going to be sick while we were out, and that gave me the confidence to say no to that, and that's been the result thereafter. Obviously, my lipids, there. So I've now got low triglycerides and high HDL, which I'm told is the better way to go in terms of avoiding heart disease. And I have my LDL there, which frankly I can't find it in myself to worry about at all, so I just don't. So that's the way that I do it now. Okay. This is some Freestyle Libre stuff that I did. So what I do is now, I don't worry at all about my blood sugar anymore. I just, at intervals, I put a Libre on and I find out what my body's doing for a fortnight, learn any lessons, move on. So that's from January this year. And the one on Sunday there, I was really annoyed about, because to be polite, I ate a piece of somebody's cake. It wasn't even nice cake. I don't know why I was that polite. And it had done that. So then it occurred to me that I could eat something, photograph it, and show people what it did whenever I was doing a talk. So that is a chocolate orange cupcake, people, in case you hadn't already noticed. It wasn't very nice either, actually, but hey-ho. So Wednesday, the 11th of Jan, I ate that at about 11, and then you can look at my curve there and you can see sort of, you know, what impact that had on me. And granted, there's quite a lot of sugar in that with all that sort of stuff, but that's just to show people that, you know, although I'm nicely controlled now, if I eat something, it's a problem. So that's what happened to 3 days after I ate that cake. So that was when I just ate what I wanted to do, how I normally do, and I think that's pretty good. 2 minutes? Right, that's all right. That's okay, but I was concentrating, wasn't I? So my blood sugar now is basically normal, you know, most of the time. However, there you go, just because I know people don't believe you when you have type 2 unless you've got some evidence. 42 there in June, July 42 again, 36 in January, 34 in April. Now the thing I also wanted to say about April is, at Christmas, I drove from England to Scotland with my dad, who's very poorly indeed after he spent Christmas with us, to go and move in with him to help care for him with the rest of my family. I've changed job, I've changed country, I've changed the way I live, I've changed the way I commute, I've changed everything. Now before, when I was eating a lot of glucose, I wouldn't have been able to do that without my blood sugar being all over the place, but now I'm pretty stable. Last one of those, 37. I'm not sure how accurate that is because I managed to knock the thing off, which is the first time I've ever done that. But that's because I was swimming a lot, because with the rheumatoid as well, what I just want to say to you guys is that when I'd finished having the rheumatoid and was then told that I was in remission, at that point I could swim 10 25-metre lengths with breaks, okay? But I have been getting stronger and I have been building up my stamina. And I decided to do the Diabetes UK 22 miles in 22 weeks swim. Well, I had to avoid their advice, obviously, which was to carb up, otherwise I was going to collapse. So I avoided that. And what I did instead was I swam fasted first thing in the morning over that period because I felt really good doing that. And by the end of that period, I was then able to swim 122 lengths without stopping. Because I went out the last Saturday after, because I'd essentially been training for 22 weeks, hadn't I, but with a break. And I just went, I'm going to swim as long as I can. And I actually could have swum longer, but there was just so many people in the pool getting in the way. You know, so there you go. So that's me. So what next? I'm into minus figures now, aren't I? Well, what I really want, I'm not going to stop though, what I really want is for people... It's for people to have access to a choice I was able to make and to be supported in that choice. And obviously a lot of us here want exactly the same thing. So the things I've done is I ran a Diabetes UK community support group for people with type 2 for 2 years. I've stopped that now because I've moved, but my co-facilitator has taken that on. I facilitate a support dial-in at work and provide resources to colleagues whenever they need it. I developed a number of presentations, which I just present whenever I can, really, to tell people, you know, this sort of thing. And with a colleague who's a vegan, I'm starting Munchy Mondays at work. So what we're doing is we're producing different kinds of food, because obviously the traditional thing to raise money for a charity is to make lots of cakes. So I'm just not doing that, obviously. So both of us are interested in health and how we eat and so on. So we're going to make things that are a bit off the ball, give people the recipe, give them a chance to try, and the proceeds will be banked for the PHC, which we're hoping to start in July. So that hopefully. So hopefully what I'll be doing then is raising awareness at the same time rather than being part of the problem. I want to be part of the solution for others. So I've also joined the Diabetes Cross-Party Group at Holyrood, which has been a very interesting experience so far, because obviously there hasn't been a lot of awareness of the kind of thing that I'm doing there, but we're there's lots of conversations going on there. So, key messages to take away. So, given the right nutrition, our bodies can be remarkably resilient. I thought that by the time I was the age I am now, which is 56, that I would be lucky if I still had both my legs, that I might have problems with my sight, and that I would be really immobile because of the rheumatoid. But I'm not. I have energy. I feel like almost I'm dancing through life and feel almost like a teenager again. That's only on the days when I'm a bit hyper, though. I want to say knowledge is power, but obviously only if you act on it, which I say in other contexts a lot. And this, don't think of food as light entertainment, because our society does now. And that means that, you know, I'm always having to offend people by saying no. And the last thing, obviously, is if it ain't totally delicious, you're wasting your time. Don't waste your time, people. Thank you very much for listening.
And we'll have a 5-minute switch over where you can go to the healthcare professional.
Well then, make me feel wanted, ask me some questions. Hi.
Laura, did you have any healthcare professionals involved in your community support?
I did. I was sent a nutritionist who spent half an hour telling us to chop the fat off our chicken breasts, but it was okay to eat spotted dick and stuff like that. And then at the end I said to her, well, look, I just don't do it that way. Is that a problem? And she said, no. And that was the end of the conversation. And obviously, we had a lot of people come along to tell us to look after our feet and stuff like that. But everybody's assumption was that we would inevitably have high blood sugars and we would inevitably not be looking after ourselves, and therefore they would inevitably be looking after us instead. So I kind of stopped asking people, really. It's a sad thing, isn't it? But you know, you want to work with people, but people don't want to work with you. Or if they do want to work with you, it's hard to know how. I think that must be part of the key, mustn't it? Okay.
Hi, very interesting how you got on with Diabetes UK and swearing low carb with me.
Well, we were only affiliated. You know, they ran a study called RAPSID, which I believe lowered blood pressure very slightly, where we facilitated other people talking about how they looked after themselves. So that was a success, and on the back of that, we did more peer support groups. So it's now what's called community groups. It's not one of the official Diabetes UK groups, and obviously it was a difficult situation to be in, because we had to have essentially 2 layers of conversation about it, which obviously makes everything very difficult. But all the people I worked with wanted to help. You know, there was no question about that. Oh, Sam's going around to somebody else. Look there.
Hi, my name's Celia. Great talk, thank you. You're obviously a highly motivated patient. I find a lot of my diabetes patients really aren't, and they're very resistant to making any kind of changes. I wondered if you had any tips for things.
Well, I think there's a number of features there. I mean, first of all, there's what kind of person you were to start with. So I was always a very active individual. So, like, you know, when I got diagnosed with a rheumatoid, she said to me, you know, take exercise. And I was going like, didn't you hear that I said that I thought I might have it because I was running, and when I was mucking the horse out, you know, I wasn't feeling great. But so it's a bit about expectation and a bit about what kind of person you are. But there's also many of the people I talk to just think that they've tried everything, and they don't even know there's an option. So once they think they've tried everything, what are you to conclude? You're to conclude you are a uniquely unfortunate individual, and psychologically you just can't go there anymore. You just have to try and accept. And I felt at one point that it was my inability to accept was actually a problem, if you see what I mean. But in actual fact it wasn't. It was a good thing. But at one point, you know, I just felt like people were treating me as though I was a bad patient, and that actually when I was trying to make myself better, it's not part of the system, so it was kind of inconvenient. So it's a lot easier for many people just to be part of the system. And obviously we also have that overwhelming belief that the drug is the only way to go, you know. So if you've internalized that view, you go to a doctor, what do you expect? You expect a drug, they give you a drug, job done, you know.
Last question.
Then I can run away.
Did you make any use of glucose meters? It always
Oh, yes, I did.
Sort of
Yes.
theoretically that
Yes.
if you could eat one of the standard diets or meal, and then test yourself and then say, look what's
Yeah,
happening.
so I
That's
did use a meter. I haven't always had the same GP because I've moved a few times, and some of them would give me one and some of them wouldn't. So I funded myself when required. So what they say is they're not sure, are they, that giving people meters is really helpful. And to be honest, to start with, when I was following the standard advice, it wasn't. All I was really doing was documenting how bad it was. And because I thought I was doing what I had to do anyway, what kind of change was I able to implement? And it was only when I realised that I didn't have to eat this stuff that I'd been told. You know, I mean, really, how bad is it? You know, just not having a sandwich at lunch. Oh, and that porridge thing as well, obviously. I mean, so many people who eat porridge and then go, but the dietitian told me, but it sends my blood up to 15. And they think that is just how it's going to be. And that's kind of how I felt. But once I started cutting down, I learned loads of lessons from that, and I found that really useful. Yeah.
Brilliant. Let's give
Okay.
another round of applause for that.